This is Mark Nelson, and welcome to our Prevent Plant, Late Plant, Replant webinar sponsored by Kansas Farm Bureau. We've got three great speakers. We'll be starting off with Kasey Engel, Crop Marketing Specialist with Farm Bureau Financial Services. Then we'll have Monte Vandeveer, Extension Agricultural Economist with Kansas State University, and Ryan Flickner, our Senior Director of Advocacy with Kansas Farm Bureau. Hopefully we'll have time at the end for questions. The way this thing's going to work, you folks all can hear us, but you cannot talk into this. What we'd like you to do is go to the chat box and type in any questions that you might have, and then with our remaining time at the end, we'll work to go through those questions and answer them as best we can. As you all know, everyone's situation is very, very unique. There may be things that we say here or people say here that we think is going to be right, but given your unique situation, maybe we don't quite see it. It may not work exactly that way for you. Always work with your crop insurance agent on all these questions, but I think we're going to be able to address a lot of maybe your basic questions here today. And so with no further ado, I'm going to turn this over to Kasey Engel.
All right. Thank you, Mark, for giving us the opportunity to be here. I'm going to go over some of the crop insurance options and things that are available for you guys, for our members to look at. I'm going to start with replanting and some of the things that to think about with replants. I got about 10 slides on that. And then I'm going to jump over with the balance being on preventive planting and things that we can do on the preventive planting side. Is that the beginning slide? We need to get back to the, okay, how do we get back to the very first slide, Mark? Here we go. Thank you. Okay, here's some of the rules behind replanting. I think, like Mark kind of touched on, communication's always key. So just be reaching out to your crop insurance agent and getting that communication opened up. If you're in a replanting situation, you're definitely required to notify the agent prior to replanting. So make sure you get in touch with them. If you do not and you replant, the penalty could be loss of insurance to all your acres. So you definitely want to communicate with your agent before you get out in the field and do any replanting. 50 acres is the limit. If you got to have the 20-20 rule met, where you got to have at least 20 acres of replanting or 20% of the unit. If it's under 50 acres, you can do what they call a self-certified replant, where the agent can actually authorize you to go out in the field and replant and do that on your own and report your costs associated with that. If it gets over 50 acres, then we do have to get an adjuster involved, and they're gonna need to come out and do that inspection and actually give you permission to go through that replant. So with that, we jump over to the corn planting dates across the state of Kansas, and you'll want to check your RMA actuarials for this. But our final planting dates are May 15th, May 25th, and May 31st, depending where you're located. And there's a 20-day late planting period in most situations. Again, you'll always want to check your actuarials to see if that's different, but pretty standard is 20 days for corn. And there's a 1% penalty for any corn late planted after that final plant date, so keep that in mind. This slide kind of shows where those dates are, the final planting dates are distributed across the state of Kansas and where they come into play across the state. This is kind of an example then for corn using a May 25th final plant date. You are required to replant through the June 4th timeline per the policy provisions. So you're going to be required to replant till then. After June 4th, the policy allows you to actually replant for another 10 days. So keep that in mind. And then if we get to that June 14th date, authorization is going to be needed from the adjuster to replant, as the policy provision says, if it is feasible to replant. So you probably get authorization for most AIPs and the adjusters all the way to the end of June if it is feasible, but that is going to be a determination made by the AIP. So after June 4th, the corn acres can be appraised and destroyed if you so intend to do that. So keep that in mind. You can just have, after that final plant day, you can have the adjuster come out and actually do an appraisal at that point, and you can destroy, and you can plant, and you have the option to insure the second crop. So replanting payment is going to be $32 an acre for corn. So that's going to be that 8 bushel price, or that 8 bushel guarantee times your $4 price times your share. So soybean planting dates across the state, our final plant date is June 15th, 20th, 25th, and 30th, depending on your location. So again, keep in mind, you'll want to check the RMA actuarials to see where you're located at, and confirm what your final plant date is. And then in most situations, we do have a 25-day late planting period for soybeans, and there is that 1% penalty per day after the final plant date for late planted acres. So keep that in mind. This map kind of shows the correlation across the state where those final plant dates are, depending on your location. And then here's the soybean example using that June 25th final plant date. So remember, you're going to be required to replant through that June 25th date if that is your final plant date. So the AIP would come out in a replant situation, and they're going to require you to do that per the policy provisions. So after June 25th, the policy allows you to replant for another 15 days until July 10th. So that's just also in the provisions. After that July 10th date, an adjuster is going to authorize you if it's feasible to replant after that point in time. So they're going to make a determination depending, on the conditions at that time, and they're going to determine if it's feasible to replant. So after that June 25th date, in this example, bean acres can be appraised and destroyed if you so want to do that. And you can also qualify for replant payment of $28.62, and that is just that 3 bushel guarantee times the $9.54 base price to get that payment calculation. Some basic reminders: always report the original planting date to the FSA on your crop insurance acreage report. Even though you're replanting at a later time, you always want to report that original date. So you're not penalized that 1% reduction in guarantee for those later planted acres. It is approved by the AIP to replant, so you get to report that original date. If the landlord has a share, they can receive a replant payment as well. So we can't pay 100% of the replant to the tenant, so they'll need to talk to the landlord if that is the case. First crop, second crop, this kind of comes into play if the original crop is appraised and destroyed after that appropriate date, then a second crop can be planted. Keep in mind that lower yield is appraised yield is going to be plugged into your corn database, and then the second crop can be planted. You have the choice to insure the second crop. So if you do not want to insure that second crop, you can receive 100% of the payment for the first crop and go on. Down the road, if you insure the second crop, then you receive 35% of the claim on the first crop after harvest, and the second crop would receive the greater of the loss, or 100% of the first crop claim. So it just depends how the year goes and which crop would pay more. So we'll go get to questions at the end after, but we're going to move on to preventive planning. In order to qualify for preventive planning, the insured cause of loss has to be very general to the surrounding area with similar characteristics. I'd say this year, with the excessive moisture and flooding and across the area, it's going to be pretty general, and there's not going to be a lot of questions from the IPs on that. Again, we still have that 2020 rule in place, same as for replants. And keep in mind, communication is always key. So be in contact with your agent. Make sure you get that loss reported. You got to have that reported within 72 hours of either the final plant date, if you do not intend to plant in the late planting period, or 72 hours after the end of the late planting period. So that's a RMA requirement, and it's crop specific. So definitely very crucial to be communicating with your agent if you bump up against those deadlines and get those claims submitted, so we don't risk getting that denied or not having a payment. So as always, the more documentation is key. If you want, take photos. That's encouraged of the flooded area of the field. Any receipts, seed receipts, chemical receipts, all that stuff could be requested by the adjuster to prove that your intentions were to plant the crop that you specified on the acreage report. So preventive planting payments, corn, it's going to be 55% of your guarantee, and soybeans is going to be 60% of your guarantee. So just kind of keep that in mind. That's kind of the payment or guarantee that we're going to be looking at. And right off the bat, you can receive either 100% or 35% of your PP payment. If you want to take 100% of your PP claim, that is an option. You must, the acres then must remain black until November 1st, and unless you're planting a 2020 wheat crop. So also an approved cover crop can be planted after that final plant date, but you cannot hay or graze until after the November 1st deadline. So definitely very important to leave that cover crop untouched until after November 1st. You cannot harvest or chop the cover crop before that date as well. 35% of the PP claim, if you want to plant and insure a second crop, that is an option. Then you're going to be reducing your corn PP down to that 35% payment. 35% of the premium will be paid on that, and you can have that second crop insured at 100%. So, or a cover crop can be planted and it can't be hayed or graded till after the final plant date. So, important if you're taking the 35% preventive planting and planting a second insured crop. If you take PP on corn and then plant soybeans, milo, etc., those now planted acres will be considered ghost acres at the FSA and not qualify for any market facilitation payments. This is kind of something Ryan's going to touch on later and kind of go through that. So I'll kind of defer it to him as he's getting more information on that as we speak. But just kind of wanted to throw that out there. Soybeans, the preventive planting guarantee is going to be 60%. So in this example, you can receive either 100% again or 35% of your PP payment. If you're taking 100% of the preventive planting claim, remember, again, acres must remain black until November 1st, unless you're planting that 2020 wheat crop. An authorized cover crop can also be planted not before the final plant date, and it cannot be hayed or grazed until after that November 1st deadline. So if you are doing a second insured crop, remember that's going to reduce the soybean prevent planting to 35% of that 60% guarantee. And a cover crop planted cannot be hayed or grazed until after that November 1st date. So you pay 35% of the premium as well in that situation. So important information on that. There will be a penalty for planting a second crop of 60% of your approved yield will be entered into your database for corn for the 2019 history. So just kind of keep that in mind if you get in that situation. There is a penalty for planting that second crop. Some general reminders, the 2020 rule is the same as replanting, so we still have that in place. You got to have at least 20 acres or 20% of the unit. Optional unit structure, it would be a qualification for each unit, and the enterprise unit could be the sum of all the fields to meet that qualification. So definitely remember that. Do not split fields if it's not in your general rotation. This could fall back onto a claim denial or not being paid a preventive planting payment if it's not common to your rotation. Split fields is kind of a dangerous scenario, so I would stay away from that. If you can get it planted, it's always encouraged to just plant the whole field and not rely on that preventive planting on partial acres. Eligible acres, again, this is going to be your highest number of acres planted for each crop in the last 4 years. So any acres that you have planted for the year is going to be deducted from those eligible acres. So keep that in mind, your total eligible acres. So anything planted is going to be deducted from those eligible acres. So for an example, if you report 650 preventive planting corn acres but only have 450 eligible corn acres, then the other 200 would have to be paid from the remaining eligible acres, or a similar crop, most likely soybeans. So something to kind of keep in mind. They're going to roll those acres to a different crop with similar value. An 1,000-acre farming operation that has 450 eligible corn acres that go to preventive planting, and then they end up planting 1,000 acres, that's going to be considered a second crop, and the corn is going to be paid at 35% rate. So just kind of keep that in mind on your eligible acres. And you can start turning in preventive planting claims for corn. Now, if you're after your final plant date, if you do intend to plant in a late planting period, you have those 20 days, and then we need to get those claims submitted within 72 hours after that 20-day window. So make sure you're working with your agent and communicating that and getting those turned in at that point. For the acreage report, you always want to mark out on the maps the crop and the planting date, and kind of keep those separate when you're filling out the acreage report with your agent. So any water holes or any preventive planting areas are going to have to be marked separate in those situations. So preventive planting corn, here's some of the options we're going to run through. Corn acres, what you can do is you can take 100% of the PP payment and keep it black on November 1st. That is an option. Or you take 35% of your preventive planting payment and plant a second crop. Probably going to be your soybeans after your late planted corn. So keep in mind 60% of your approved yield is going to be stuck in to that corn database. So you're going to have to take a little bit of a hit if you're planting that second crop. You also have to wait until the end of the late planting period for corn to plant those soybeans. So keep that in mind. Another option, take 100% of the PP, keep it black till November 1st. Take 35% of your preventive planting payment, plant a second crop, if not beans, then maybe grain sorghum, wait till after the late planting period for corn to plant. So you have to wait until the end of the late planting period for corn to decide to take the preventive planting on corn or PP on soybeans, whatever option is better in that situation. Okay, here's kind of an example, and I think Bonnie's going to kind of get into some of these economics a little bit better. But with our crop insurance base price coming in at $4 and our soybeans at $9.54, for this example, this producer has a 75% insurance coverage, a corn APH of 140 and a soybean APH 45. Option one is to submit a preventive planting claim on corn. We take that 140 APH, times it by a 75% coverage level, times the $4, and we get a total guarantee of $420. And if you're taking a preventive planting with that 55% of your guarantee, that brings that payment down to $231. So that is your option. You could take that payment. The acres would have to remain black then until November 1st, and there would be no APH impact from that scenario. Here's option two. You could also, using that same 75% coverage level, corn APH 140, soybeans APH is 45. Do not submit a preventive planting claim and plant a second insurable crop. There would be no penalties on the preventive planting payment, and that second insured crop would be basically insured 100% of your guarantee. So you could insure those soybeans with no problem at 100%. Option three, in that same scenario, submit a preventive planting claim on corn and plant that second insurable crop. Corn preventive planting on your first crop would be running through those same calculations. That $231 payment, which is 55% of the $420 guarantee, times 35% for planting that second crop brings that payment down to $81 in this scenario. And then you could insure those soybeans for 100%. So here's the fourth option. Plant the original crop during the late planting period. Producers do have the option to plant their crop after the final planting date. There is a 20-day late planting period for corn. And keep in mind that 1% penalty per day in the late planting period. So after that final day of the late planting period, you then have the choice to insure those acres at the PP guarantee, which would be that 55% or that $231 in this example, or choose not to insure those acres. So you could not insure, and that's an option as well after you get through the late planting period. Some general reminders: you must report your preventive planting acres to the FSA. Definitely make an appointment to file that PP form CC 576 within 15 days of the final planting date. If you have PP to report. So it's always good to get in there and make sure those acres match up with what you're reporting to the crop insurance. Okay, I think that's all I had.
All right, as we switch up our PowerPoints, we might take the two questions that we've had. I'll work from the bottom up. What is the prevent plant amount paid for cotton? That's 50%.
That's right. Yeah.
And I'll turn the other one to our experts. We've got a couple of folks with insurance here. Does an insured need to notify us when replanting cotton, meaning insurance agents?
Kasey,
Yeah, yep. You definitely want to notify them
for any crop.
for any crops. You bet.
Then we have Monte Vandeveer with Kansas State University. Talk a little bit of the economics.
Thank you, Mark. Introduce myself again. I'm Monte Vandeveer. I'm based out of Garden City at K-State Southwest Research and Extension Center, and we've posted a couple articles the last 2 weeks on preventive planting, and so on our agmanager.info website. So hopefully our listeners can check those out later too if they haven't already seen them. So we're just going to try to put some dollars and cents on these options that Kelsey was just talking about here. I think we have pretty much the same options, but I put them in different order here. So what I'm calling the options is, first of all, don't plant corn at all and get your full PP payment, or you can go ahead and plant that corn crop late if you think you've still got a chance of getting some yields. And then the other two options are planting some second crop later. If you do it during the late planting period, you're not going to get any of the corn PP payment. But if you wait till the late planting period ends, you can still get 35%. So we're going to try to put some dollars and cents on those options and see kind of at least what things look like right now. Now here's the complicating factor is we've got so many other balls in the air, things we're juggling, things we're not certain about. Maybe the biggest one is these Market Facilitation Program payments. At least when the MFP program was rolled out, the USD announcement said it's only going to be made on planted acres. So when I'm doing my little budgets later, that's what we're going to how we're going to look at it. We still don't know the payment rates either. So if they are only made on planted acres, then that could tilt the decision one way or the other whether we want to plant something or not. So we're going to at least come up with some very rough ballpark guesses and try to say something about that. Second thing that's going on is the markets are reacting to these reduced plantings and expectations of lower yields, and so prices are going up. So that does affect the value if we do decide to plant something. My little example here, suppose I do have to take a yield cut. Say I go down 10% on my yields, but if prices have gone up 20%, I'm still coming out ahead. Planting still makes sense. So that's going to be a key assumption as we look at our examples. And then here's the last wild card is there's just been a new disaster relief package approved, and I think Ryan's going to discuss that, at least mention it later, mainly focused on things like hurricane recovery, but it includes a provision for preventive planting in 2019. So if that affects the value of not planting anything, that's even another twist to consider here. So we're going to take a quick look at those different factors. The MFP payments, it was announced May 23rd. Of course, the MFP is the program to help the producers that are affected by the trade barriers. We've actually got more than 20 commodities named in the new program. That's bigger than last year's list, and but it's also a bigger dollar amount this year too, over 14 billion. So that's almost roughly 50% bigger than the number we saw last year too. So MFP payments could be important if we go ahead with this rule. Well, you see the second bullet there. You have to plant an MFP covered crop to receive the 2019 payment. Now, there's discussion that that may be being reconsidered, but that's what we know right now. Also should mention that top bullet point, the 2019 MFP payments are going to look different than last year's. The 2018 payments, you remember there was a separate payout by rate, different rate for each crop, and it was based on actual production. And it was also announced after crops were planted. So USDA did things differently this year. They didn't want to favor planting one crop over another. And so we're going to have a single county payment and just a flat dollar per acre payment, regardless, they say, of what crop you're going to plant this year. So we're still waiting for a lot of those details, but that's the kind of the twists on the MFP program that we're looking at here. Wanted to, because MFP could make a difference between planting or not planting, I wanted to at least do an example or a guesstimate of how big the payment might be. And just a very speculative exercise here, but I wanted to show an example. I'm going to be speaking tonight in Osage County about the same topic, so I put together an example for them. And I took the 2018 yields for the 4 major crops here, and I've listed also, second column there, the 2018 payment rates. And if you multiply those two, you see how much money you'd be making per acre. So in that example, we've got 36 bushel yield on our soybeans, getting $1.65 a bushel. Well, that's $59 an acre. On the corn side, you see it's a much smaller payment rate. Grain sorghum has a nice payment rate too. So if you had some acres in grain sorghum, that'd be a bigger payment. But then the fourth column is we want to calculate our overall. If we're going for a single county payment, I'm going to weight those crop by crop payments by the share of acres. So soybeans was a big number, corn was a big number, the other crops not so important. So in this particular example, you come up with most of the payment being coming from soybeans. And so in our example, we come out like $38 an acre. That would be like, you might say, a representative acre in Osage County using last year's number. Now that bottom factor there, remember we said the 2019 pool of dollars is bigger than 2018's. If we did a strict proportional adjustment there, that'd be another 50% increase there. So that would bring the payment up to $58 per acre. I think that is far and away the upper bound we might expect on this. We really don't know how it's going to be shaking out, but this whole exercise was just to try to say maybe something like a $30 per acre payment for eastern Kansas is not an unreasonable number. So that's where I was going with this. We have to wait and see how USDA comes out with their numbers. Okay, we mentioned the higher crop prices, and because we're going to see fewer acres planted, we're going to see lower overall yields, prices are going up. So if you are producing a crop, you think you can still get a decent yield, that higher crop price is going to offer some advantage over planting nothing at all. And the last week we had a report from our K-State market analyst, Dan O'Brien, about 4 different acreage planting and yield scenarios that might happen for the national corn market. Wanted to walk through those just to show people what we might be looking at here. The scenarios on the acreage side, that's the two columns. One case is down 10 million acres, the other is down 15 million acres, and then each row shows different yield outcomes. So we're looking at alternatives of 172 bushel national average yield or 167 bushel national average yield. Now the first column, where acres are down 10 million, we see a total crop size in the neighborhood of 12.5 to 12.2 billion bushels. That's down from over 14, even over 15 billion bushels in the last few years. So given we've got a carryover of about 2 billion bushels, the price is going to have to rise in order to ration that crop out. So Dan puts one scenario, 10 million acres down, 172 bushel yield. We're looking at, say, a 435 season average farm price in that case. If yields go a bit lower, we could see prices above $5. Now, in an even lower acreage scenario, down 15 million acres, we could see prices well over $5, even reaching $6 a bushel, according to these rough estimates that we're seeing coming out. So that's all to say there's certainly good potential for higher crop prices as a result of these lower plantings and lower expected yields. So now the rest of what I want to do today is just walk through those four options and try to put some dollar values in there. I think we've already talked through most of these details. You get that full corn prevented planting if you choose option one. That's not planting anything and taking the full PP payment. You're going to save your corn production costs. They still have some weed control costs or cover crops. I figured a little bit in there. And we have some rules if you go with the cover crop. I'm assuming that this option does not receive the MFP payment. Here's my option number two. I'm planting, go ahead and plant my corn late. Probably going to get a little bit lower yield. I'm not going to get the PP payment, but hopefully with crop prices going up, I can still get a yield and still get some good market returns. My production costs are still going to be virtually all there. My insurance coverage is going down. I'm also hoping I'm going to collect on that MFP payment. Okay, here's my third option. I'm not going to plant the corn, but I'm going to plant a second crop, a different crop, say soybeans, right away. I'm still in the corn late planting period, so I don't get the corn PP payment, but hopefully I can still get a decent yield on that second crop. And we're also hoping prices are staying strong for that. Still going to have the full production cost for that second crop and hopefully get that MFP payment. Here's the option four. This is where I wait until after the late planting period for corn ends so I can collect that 35% PP payment, and then I'll go ahead and plant that second crop. So I get the 35% PP payment. I still owe 35% of the corn premium. Probably going to have a lower crop or lower yield on my second crop because of this late planting. Probably still going to have most of my production costs. This may fit the ghost payment case that we're talking about here. So whether we get that MFP payment or not is a wait and see. I assumed we're getting it, but we'll look at what we get with and without. So that's the four cases we're going to look at. Here's my example farm. I've got 120 bushel APH. I chose 75% coverage, so my production guarantee is 90. With a $4 projected price, I get a revenue guarantee of 360. So my option one is my return on option one, take the full prevented planting payment, so I get 55% of that 360 revenue guarantee. So it's about $198. And I say, well, I've still got my corn insurance premium I have to pay, still got some weed control costs there. So I'm showing a net return to this option of $150 per acre for this example farm. Now my option 2 is go ahead and plant that corn late, hope I can still salvage a crop. I'm assuming a 20% yield reduction. That gives me 96 bushels per acre yield. Assuming I get a cash price of $435, so revenue comes in at about $418 per acre. My input costs, I'm basing that on the K-State farm management budgets. The money I still have to spend, looks like about $244. So my net before MFP is about $174 per acre. If you add an MFP on top of that, it's even better. So I'm already about $23, $24 an acre ahead of the full prevented planting option that I looked at in option 1 there. So, but key is going to be how big of a yield hit we're going to take, how much that price is going to bump up. Okay, here's my third option. I'm decided I'll plant soybeans right away. Hopefully I can still get a pretty good yield on that. So, but I have to give up my corn prevented planting payment. So I'm assuming 42 bushel yield. Price goes up to $9. I've got $378 an acre revenue. My input costs come out about $219. So netting is about $159 per acre. So just slightly ahead of that full corn prevented planting payment. If I get the MFP payment, then that looks even better on top of that. And finally, here's my option 4. This is where I plant my soybeans a little bit later and collect 35% of the corn prevented planting. So in that case, I've dropped my yield down to 30 bushels per acre. So I get that $69 prevented planting payment from the corn side. So total revenue is about $339. My expenses are about $220. Notice I'm having to pay some corn insurance premium there. So my net on this option is about $119 per acre. So on this option, we're showing I would need a MFP payment to be comparable to the return on option 1, the full prevented planting. So now, having said all that, it's pretty clear the numbers are sensitive to what we assume. So I wanted to show some different cases here, assuming different yields and prices. So this column 1, that's the examples that we just walked through. So $150 on the prevented planting payment, that's number 1. And you see options 2 and 3 look just a smidge better, even before we consider MFP. Second column is I'm more pessimistic on the yield side. I knocked my yields down on corn to 75 bushels an acre, and you can see how I dropped my regular planted or late planted soybean yields too. So in that case, we see prevented planting, full prevented planting has the edge, and it would take a pretty significant MFP payment too to make the other options competitive with that. My third column is suppose I've got the same yields as before, but my prices are a little bit more optimistic. Well, that's even better than column 1. So maybe not the most interesting case there. Then the last column is going to be the lower yields, but a little bit higher price. So in that case, we see our corn yields down, our soybean yields down, but the prices have risen even more. And I'm showing all of these options coming in just a smidge below what the full prevented planting payment is for corn. So if we ended up in that boat, we'd need an MFP payment to make those other options look more competitive with our full prevented planting payment. So that's a lot of numbers kind of fire hosed at you guys. And what we did was we posted an Excel spreadsheet on agmanager.info. It's just been up there a day or two. You can see the link to the particular page there. And that's a case where you can plug in your own yields, your own price expectations, even what you think the MFP payment might be, and compare your different options there, hopefully in a straightforward way. I should mention that this spreadsheet also shows soybeans as my second crop, but you can swap that out, put in numbers for grain sorghum, and the math, the formulas will still all be doing the same thing. So I think you can use it that way too. So that's a look at the numbers, and I have my contact information here, and you can contact me at a later date if we have more questions.
All right, thanks, Monty. Okay, as we switch up presentations again, please, if you have questions, use that chat box, and you can type those in. We'll keep checking those. But I'm going to go now, and we're going to pivot this thing and send it to Ryan Flickner, our Senior Director of Advocacy with Kansas Farm Bureau, to kind of give us a little bit more on the political side of some of this, and what might happen, what we do know, what we don't know regarding MFP, et cetera.
Thanks, Mark. Afternoon, everyone. It is very political in nature with MFP kind of coming out when it did. I know a lot of folks, Monty and Kasey and others here in the room, we've had various conversations with so-called experts at the national level, certainly talking to other states and the Farm Bureau system and whatnot. But what I'm going to give you now, and actually when Monty was presenting, I did get a breaking announcement, I guess, that at least for MFP, it must be planted acres here for 2019. So the attorneys at USDA did rule that for MFP to be eligible, you do have to plant this year. So that's at least one question that has been answered. But some of this will be repetitive based off of the two previous presentations, but I think it just kind of lays out the May 23rd, 2019 press release coming out of USDA. What are we dealing with here? And MFP round 2, or MFP 2019, it will be a $14.5 billion program in direct payments that go to farmers that have been impacted by retaliatory and unjustified trade tariffs. The 2019 payments will be based on 2019 planted acres. And again, the attorneys at USDA just announced and came out with that decision today. It must be planted acres. Payment eligibility plantings cannot exceed the total of the 2018 plantings. So that does get into an issue on the next slide we'll get into from a Kansas-specific issue regarding fallow acres. The covered commodities, as Monty said, I think there's 21 or 22 different covered commodities for MFP. I have bolded the big ones, at least from a Kansas perspective: corn, soybeans, wheat, alfalfa hay, canola, cotton, sorghum. One thing that we are looking into, and I've asked some questions since alfalfa hay is included in this 2019 MFP go-around, how will sorghum silage or sorghum forage or even corn silage be treated? So that is an ongoing question. Next bullet there is going to be a single payment rate for each county multiplied by the farm's total plantings in aggregate for 2019. So Monty did a great job of kind of walking through that Osage County example. Certainly I've heard some from some counties based off what their plantings tend to be. For example, Southwest Kansas, down the Garden City area, it's very heavily irrigated corn. Not as much soybeans, probably some limited sorghum even, with some wheat. So certainly going back to the flashback of the 2014 Farm Bill, dealing with some county discrepancies along geopolitical lines. One county got a large payment just across the township or the county road. The payment was much smaller. How those even out and get weighted out, depending on if soybeans will be the heavy weight within that aggregate, I think is something that we're still waiting and asking USDA to release the methodology that goes into determining the rate. Dairy producers will receive a per hundredweight payment on their production history. Hog producers will receive a payment based on their swine inventory at a later specified time frame. And our tree nut producers will receive a payment based on 2019 acres of production. So for those of you in Southeast Kansas that have pecan groves and are in that business, there will be some potential payments there as well. I highlight, or I guess italicize, the potential here for up to 3 tranches of payments for the 2019 MFP. One we know for sure will come as soon as USDA can take the July 15th crop reporting information and then dole out that money in late July or early August. They being USDA have also announced that there may be other opportunities if conditions warrant, if we have not had any satisfactory resolution when it comes to some of the trade and the tariff issues that are ongoing. The second potential tranche could be November of this year, and then again, if necessary, the third potential tranche will actually be January of 2020. I just got the typo there. One thing on that front, similar to last year, USDA, FSA in particular, does not know for sure how it will be weighted. If you recall, back in 2018, you could take your MFP payment in 2018, or you could actually wait to go in and certify acres from a tax and an accounting aspect. If you needed to defer that income and wait until 2019, you could actually go in and certify your production for MFP for the 2018 payment in 2019. So we're not for sure how that's all going to work out regarding this 2019 MFP go around. A couple of items that we have flagged both at the Kansas Farm Bureau level and again at the American Farm Bureau level with USDA and congressional offices is this ongoing concern and trade assistance payments, whether they're going to be included with the prevent plant acres or how that will work. The second one is the maximum acreage eligible for trade assistance payments in 2019 and how that takes into consideration the planted acres from 2018, basically capping that. But we also want to flag the concern or the issue about the acres of prevent planting, the fallow acres. If 2018 was a high fallow year for you and just your normal rotation, you intended to plant more acres here in 2019, it's kind of a double whammy because you didn't have the bushels to certify in the 18 MFP. And then USDA is, at least the information we're working off now, you will be capped for the 2019 payments based off your 2018 acreage, as well as those silage and forage options, specifically with grain, sorghum, and corn. Another argument that Farm Bureau has made is the assistance payments and payment rate should be announced as soon as possible. We'll see if that actually is ever made public. I'm sure Monte and I could debate this from an Ag Econ perspective, whether or not USDA will find it prudent and wise to actually release the matrix and the aggregate formulas that they use to make the county decisions, or if that will remain under a lockbox at headquarters in Washington, D.C. Forever. Another argument we've made is all payments should be made in 2019. Consideration should be given to reducing the number of payments from 3 down to 2 to help for the immediate financial needs. Certainly within the Farm Bureau travels that Mark and I have done and others on staff, we are fully and keenly aware of some of the economic conditions you all out in the countryside are facing with the ongoing, 5 or 6 years of depressed prices, and then the ongoing kind of conclusions and just ramifications of some of the uncertainty when it comes to various trading partners and what the market signal is sending to all of you. Another item that we have flagged is when determining county level trade assistance payments to prevent those large payment differences across county lines. Again, that goes back to some of the concerns that a lot of our members raised coming out of the 2014 Farm Bill with depending on which geopolitical line you lived on and which farm or operation or tract of ground might have been on the opposite line, seeing some very wide discrepancies within the ARC program, in particular, the payment rates that went out. So because we don't know exactly the formula that will be used in this MFP 2019 program, we at least wanted to flag that with USDA, knowing full good and well it's a different administration, it's a different secretary, to make sure that they are aware that that is a concern that comes from the countryside. Monte and Kasey did a great job of kind of highlighting the disaster program. Just real quickly, it passed the House of Representatives on Monday. So it's basically brand spanking new, and we're waiting on President Trump when he gets back from Europe to actually sign it into law. Reading through that, there's a couple of important things I think folks need to realize is USDA was allocated roughly $3 billion on the disaster package. Counter that with the $14.5 billion program that is coming out through MFP. So there's not quite the dollars to go around. Yes, $3 billion is still a huge chunk of money, but just how far and wide will some of that disaster package end up going to help producers across the nation? One thing that I read over the lunch hour here is that payments on the crop insurance policies, both NAP and the multi-peril, thanks to the disaster package that Congress passed, is they do have the ability, USDA will have the ability to cover up to 90% of the loss if it was multi-peril or if it was NAP programs. And if you were a producer or if you had a particular crop that does not have a crop insurance policy and you were going into FSA and working through the non-insured crop disaster program or NAP, then those type of programs or those type of commodities could be covered up to 70% of their loss. Again, USDA, since it's a brand spanking new disaster package, they will have to write rules and regulations to actually implement that. So it's something that we will continue to follow on a daily basis, reading the clips. And I might flag that we have a group of Kansas Farm Bureau members that are actually going to DC next week. So this will be very timely as we're back there getting the latest information that AFBF knows and that our friends in Congress and staff and other folks over at USDA, what they can provide us up the latest program up to speed on. So we have thrown an awful lot at you. This will be, it is recorded, this will be made public, so I know there's going to be a lot of questions that get followed up. We're operating, again, with the best information that is currently available. Don't hold us 100% to what we said today if that, in fact, is going to be the rule of law, because, like I said, USDA, on a number of different fronts, specifically the MFP and the disaster program, still kind of have to get their ducks in a row and figure it out. At least from a Kasey perspective, thanks to some of the rules and agreements that are made with RMA, the crop insurance front or the crop insurance business is pretty much locked in stone for the current production year. If there are concerns or issues out there, please let Mark and myself know, because we would love to flag those. I'm sure Kasey and Farm Bureau Financial Services and the rest of the team, in having conversations with RMA, they probably will be relaying lots of concerns and issues as we gear up for the 2020, 2021, and future insured years on the crop insurance side of the game. So, questions?
Yeah, I want to thank everybody, Kasey, Monty, Ryan, but we've had a lot of questions start coming in here, especially as we started talking about some of the programs. I might real quick here, we've already answered the first two. The next one in line was, what about added farms for 2019? No MFP payment on added land owned or rented.
Great question. Basically, the most recent information that I'm aware of, if you're a newer beginning farmer and you don't have that 2018 history, USDA is trying to work through and provide assistance to those new and beginning farmers, buy, sell, trading different tracts of ground. As far as I understand, if there was a program crop via Title I that was planted on the acreage in 2018, or even within the MFP type program, now that we have 22 different covered commodities for MFP 2019, if one of those was planted in 2018, I do believe that type of acreage will be carried over, so long that it was reported to FSA at that county office and they have the information to go back and look at that. But Monty, I don't know if you've heard any different on that front. Okay.
Folks. Okay. The other question we had was, if MFP is only paid on planted acres, and you take prevented plant on corn, but then plant a cover crop on those acres, if the cover crop is one of the covered commodities on the MFP list, are those acres considered planted then? That'd be the first part of that question.
Do not know. This is kind of the issue, especially when you add alfalfa and you add in, you know, some of the more minor crops out there. I'd better just leave it as I don't know.
You most definitely do not want to record it at the FSA office as a covered crop or as a cover crop. Now, you most definitely would want to at least try to list it as that specific crop. The other part of that question was, did you say sorghum forage will be counted as sorghum for MFP?
We don't know. That is a huge issue for some of our Kansas producers that both have corn silage, sorghum silage, other, you know, silage and haylage that's out there. We have asked that. Both AFBF and Kansas Farm Bureau have been asking that to USDA and our congressional contacts to see, because alfalfa hay is one of the covered commodities for MFP 2019, how USDA is going to treat the haylage and the forage crops.
the third part of that question, disaster program says could change PP payment up to 90%, but how do we know what that will be?
We don't know until Secretary Perdue and his team at USDA makes the official announcement on that. The disaster package that the House of Representatives did pass on Monday, that's now heading to President Trump to become signed into law, it allows up to 90%. I don't know for sure. We don't know for sure if that is, in fact, where USDA is going to settle, or if they'll kind of keep it somewhere on the lower end in the 70s or 80s.
And then our last question so far, with planting of acres required for receiving MFP payments, what does that do to the choices farmers have before them? Does it negatively affect the motivation to do 100% prevented planting?
Well, I would say so, Dan. If you look at the options we compared in our examples, if we have a MFP payment of say $30 per acre, that could make a difference in some of the options we looked at. It's really such a jumble of what are yields going to be, what are prices going to be. Then we still don't even know what the MFP payment's going to be. So we have to do our best guess at this point. But that $30 an acre or whatever that number might be, to me, it could still make a big difference.
Okay, with that is all the questions that we've got for this. I want to again thank our panelists, Kasey Engel with Farm Bureau Financial Services, Monte Vandeveer with Kansas State University, and Ryan Flickner with Kansas Farm Bureau. This has been recorded. We will be. There will be a recording of this, and it will be made available. I think we have one more comment.
Hello, everyone. This is Ben Pinkston with the Farm Bureau on staff and the Advocacy Division. As we go forward, I just want to give you a couple options to stay up to date for our Farm Bureau members with other announcements and news on this front. And that's through KFB's e-news. And if you're not a part of that, I encourage you to go to kfb.org/e-news. That's E-N-E-W-S. And from the Advocacy Division, we'll be putting pieces about this and other policy issues in there, and that'll be sent out every Tuesday throughout the rest of the summer. And also, too, for issues that we feel we need more grassroots action on, you can sign up for our action alerts as a KFB member, and if you will text KFB to 52886, that'll put you into our system. And that system allows us to communicate with you and call you to action when we need our members' input. So if you have any more questions on that, please feel free to contact us. And thanks again for staying tuned and being patient with us as we work through all of these questions ourselves.
Okay, we have one more question that kind of came through. Can you help me understand the difference between chopping and haying? Why does a client get prevent planting if he has a cover crop but not if he chops it?
In RMA's eyes, it looks at chopping as harvesting, same way. So they're gonna, consider that both the same as having economic value, and that's gonna negate the payment then. So, yeah.
Basically, turn that into a second crop now.
Right. You bet.
Good question, though. Very good question. Again, I want to thank our panelists. I want to thank everyone who was able to tune in. And again, we'll have a recording of this that we'll work hard to get out so people will have a chance to hear this also. But thank you so much.